What are the parts of a practice profile and what is it used for? We create practice profiles because they clearly define the components and the practices that are prerequisite for implementation of our initiative. The practice profile defines what the program would look like if you were observing a teacher or a practitioner engaged in the practice. What are the parts of the practice profile? The practice profile begins by defining critical or core components of the initiative. The critical or core components are the most essential or indispensable components of the initiative. In other words, the key practices necessary to do the work. What does it look like when teachers are doing all the things necessary to implement your initiative? The graphic on the left is an example of an initiative with core components defined. The NC K-3 formative assessment process has 5 critical components defined for practice, and this graphic shows what those 5 critical components are. In the practice profile, the critical components are defined as part of the explanation of intended implementation. In the example you see here, the critical component adapting and responding to learning needs is highlighted. And this part of the practice profile defines exactly what it means to adapt and respond to learning needs in practice. The next part of the practice profile that we'd like to describe is the column defining expected implementation. So if we look at the individual critical component, the expected implementation column defines the activities that describe a practitioner who generalizes the required skills to a wide range of contexts, uses the skills consistently and independently, and sustains the skills over time while continuing to grow. When we define expected implementation for a critical component of a practice, we use terms like consistently, all of the time, and in a broad range of contexts, meaning that the practitioner is able to perform this critical component consistently throughout the classroom and throughout the day. Here's the example from the practice profile that defines the critical component of adapting and responding to learning needs. And you see expected implementation described in practical terms. Consistently provides descriptive feedback that is not graded or evaluative, but instead highlights which criteria for success have been met and which criteria have not been met and why, as well as cues or hints of what students need to do to move learning forward.
The next part of the practice profile is the developmental variation. And this means that practitioners are heading in the right direction. This is what we call the sweet spot of coaching. And you'll see that highlighted on the screen, that practitioners who are implementing will fall into this category when there's a nice coaching agenda. You can target particular skills for improvement in order to move into the expected implementation category from here. So you'll see things like they are engaged in this practice some of the time, somewhat inconsistently, or maybe in a limited range of context. So let's take a look at what that looks like for adapting and responding to learning needs. So here you'll see a move from consistently to provides descriptive feedback, and then from in all of the areas to some domains of learning and development. So you'll see there's a slight change in the fluency with which the practitioner is engaged in implementation. And the next part of the practice profile is the unacceptable variation. And here we just need to define what the implementation of the initiative does not look like, so that we have this clarity for practitioners. So this includes activities that describe practitioners who are not yet implementing the required skills in any of the contexts. And here there may just be some overall challenges for practitioners that are related to maybe implementation structures that are not in place, or selection or training that they have yet to receive, management of the program or model, or maybe using data to inform improvement. So there are some barriers that they have yet to overcome in the system. So words that you might see here that describe unacceptable could be that they're none of the time or inconsistently engaging in the practice. And so for this particular part of the practice profile for adapting and responding to learning needs for this example, here it just says provides feedback that is graded or evaluative, rather than highlighting which criteria for success have been met and which have not been met and why. And you've seen the expected and the developmental variation, and now you understand why this unacceptable variation does not meet the criteria for implementing this part or this critical component.